Have you ever heard of the custom of organizing ghost weddings for the dead? I am Bora, a researcher living in America. In 1990, I took a trip to a remote rural area in China to do scientific research on the spiritual culture and beliefs of the ethnic minorities there. That place was a small village in Shaanxi Province, China. To facilitate my travel, I hired Apeng, an experienced local guide, who was there to assist me along the journey. To enter this village, we had to go through places with rugged terrain, where vehicles could go no further. We had to walk the rest of the way, about 3 kilometers of forest roads. As we arrived at the village, it was already late afternoon. Apeng took me to a strange home, where I would stay in the village. After the introductions, Apeng had to return back to his hometown. Upon arrival, I saw houses that were built of stone, wooden pillars, and thatched roofs. Inside the house, the gray, moldy walls were overgrown with moss and lichens. There was absolutely no electric light, only the glow of a kerosene lamp. There was an old couple there to welcome me. They were very kind and cooked a lot of delicious local specialties for me. That night, I woke up at 2 a.m. to go to the toilet. With only the glimmering light of the dimly lit kerosene lamp to guide me through this cold, dark, scary place, I sensed that something was about to happen. That feeling grew even more intense when I began my journey outside to the toilet, about 50 meters away from the house. To make it easier, I opened my backpack and took out the torch that I had brought with me. It was super dark outside, surrounded by the sound of insects. After walking for a while, I must have been caught by some kind of a noose or snare around my feet. I was suddenly hanging upside down from a tree by a rope bound around my ankles and feet. Looking down, I saw a strange couple standing on the ground, looking up at me with their cold, sharp eyes. They were talking to each other in a strange language that was unfamiliar to me. I couldn't hear them clearly. Next, I saw the old lady walking toward the rope that I was hanging from in the tree. She pulled out a knife and severed the rope. After falling to the ground, the only thing I could remember was that I was very dizzy. But before I was able to collect my senses, the old man suddenly rushed over to me, striking me on the head with some object like a heavy stick. The next time I woke up, my surroundings were dark. There was a strong smell of tar, wood, and tea. I panicked when I realized I was lying in a wooden coffin. I tried to scream, but no sound came out of my throat, as if I had been paralyzed by the shock of what was happening. I tried to open the coffin by hitting it with all my strength, but my limbs were weak and stiff with the heaviness caused by the trauma. Lying inside the coffin, I heard people outside. They were talking and chattering. They seemed to be busy organizing something. However, due to my limited understanding of my Chinese knowledge, I was not able to understand what they were saying. A moment later, the coffin lid was opened, and 2 muscular young men pulled me up. Under the weak yellow light, I could see the house and the coffin itself. From where I was lying, I saw strange decorations made of red silk ribbons. They were hanging everywhere, forming large bunches of flowers. I was being dragged in front of this couple. It was so surprising to see that behind the couple's seat was an altar with incense, lamps, and fruit. In the middle of the back wall was the word Shunxi, which meant double happiness. I was startled to see myself wearing a Chinese groom's costume. Looking up, my heart felt a strange sense, as if someone had been suffocated. I saw a girl in a bride's dress, with a red scarf covering her face, situated next to the old couple. The girl's hands were loose. Her head was tilted to the side. Behind her were wooden splints holding her body up. It appeared as if she was still alive, seated in an upright position. It was then that I realized she must be dead, more terrified. The corpse and I were pulled out in front of the old couple. A big fat matchmaker was continuously saying something I couldn't understand. Then she held my head down to perform the ritual. If I was not mistaken, this was a Chinese wedding ceremony. The people there were surrounding me, all of them with the same cold, scary faces. At that time, I could do nothing but follow. Perhaps they had given me some kind of drug mixed in with my drink, which caused me to completely lose all my strength. After that, the corpse and I were taken back to the coffin. It was a large coffin, big enough for 2 people. And then, the coffin lid was slowly closed, followed by the sound of nails being hammered into the coffin lid. In an effort to securely close the coffin, these people seemed inhumane and cold. As the smell of the rotting corpse was rising, I felt stuffy and began to feel a cold sweat breaking out. Then, even more terrifying, the headscarf slipped and revealed the pale face of the girl's corpse. Apparently, the corpse opened its eyes and glared at me. Oh my God, my heart froze. I could see that there was still blood remaining in the eyes of that corpse. I tried to make my body flutter with the intention of escaping, but my whole body went limp and soft, without any strength. Meanwhile, the coffin was being lifted and carried to a place, then lowered into a deep pit. I heard the frightening noise of the shovels, as I could clearly feel the shoveling of dirt on my head. I was about to be buried alive, here alongside the corpse of the dead girl. I was traumatized by all these terrible things that were happening to me. But then, at that very moment, I heard the screams of a group of people, and I realized that one of them was Apeng's voice. In that moment of suspense, I saw the coffin lid open. It was Apeng and 2 other local police officers. Fortunately, they arrived just in time to free me. Apeng said that because he forgot his belongings, he came back to retrieve them. When he found out about this scary incident, he ran down to the town and reported it to the local police. But it took a while for them to arrive because it was difficult to navigate through the rough terrain. But thankfully, they made it just in time. After returning to the United States, I began to learn about the ancient Chinese ghost wedding customs. The event was so extremely frightening for me. The custom of this Chinese marriage ritual is still practiced in the same way, and customs of this dark ritual, even up to this very day. Life is unbelievably difficult for those ethnic minorities living on the Yangtze River in China. So much so that non-governmental organizations or NGOs came from all around the world to help. My name is Adele Hatter. I came from Australia as a volunteer to support these communities with so many tasks and hardships involved. A year went by, and I finally began to acclimate into their culture, their ways, and their lives. But one terrifying, macabre experience brought the entire project to an immediate halt. Everything that was new, serene, happy, and beautiful suddenly became much worse. It involved Yan, a close friend of mine. We knew each other through the volunteer group. She was about the same age as me and helped her father, a local apothecary. During a hike up the mountains to pick rare plants for her father, Jan suddenly slipped, fell off a cliff, and died. I was devastated to hear about her death. My heart was broken to pieces because I just lost my best friend. At the funeral, I gathered a small bunch of her favorite wildflowers and placed them in her left hand and prayed with my eyes closed. She was lying there as if nothing happened, like nothing had changed, as if she was merely sleeping. She was such a gentle beauty, her cherry red lips a stark contrast against her snow-white, smooth complexion. About 2 days after the burial, I was working in my cabin when I heard a loud knock on the door coming from outside. I opened the door and found Jan's sister, looking so terribly sad, anxious, and scared. Tears were running down her cheeks as she told me that Jan's grave had been dug up by someone and that her body was now gone. I was speechless, and chills ran up and down my spine. I was so shocked that my legs began trembling, and I almost couldn't stand on my feet any longer. But I mustered up my courage and immediately accompanied Jan's sister and a few of the other volunteers to come to the grave. When we arrived, we saw the tomb had been destroyed, most likely by a shovel. Soil and stones everywhere, and the tombstone had been knocked over, and the lid of the coffin was open, with brown stains and a few maggots. This was the saddest and most revolting scene I had ever witnessed. I never thought such things were possible, and had certainly never heard of such stories back in Australia, where the authorities would have quickly taken matters into their own hands. I felt exhausted and distraught, so I decided to go to bed early. As I'd just fallen asleep, I suddenly felt like something or somebody was summoning me. I tried to open my eyes, but I still couldn't see anything. Slowly, I could recognize Jan in a bridal dress, surrounded by a misty haze. The fabric was a beautiful crimson red, and Jan suddenly burst into tears. The sound of her crying became more and more intense, but after a while, she vanished. Was it just a dream? It all seemed so real. The rest of that night, I only managed to sleep for a few hours. My mind was so full of emotions. My thoughts were scrambled. Several nights later, I dreamed of Jan again. This time, the scenery was different, and I was walking down the village's main street. I could see Jan from a distance, standing in front of a bridal shop, but as I got nearer, she disappeared again. Again on this night, I couldn't sleep. I was so nervous and began sweating profusely. That's when I realized that Jan was trying to reach out to me in my dreams. Was she trying to tell me something? The following day, I went to a nearby bridal shop as soon as it opened. After questioning the clerk, he told me that a strange visitor had been at the store. He identified that man as Pao. He was an unemployed young man who recently bought a wedding dress that cost about 200 yen. Then he came back a couple days later to buy makeup, accessories. The salesman found that a bit strange, given Pao's financial situation, but he did not question it. He was just too happy to make the sale. I immediately texted that information to Jan's sister, and we went to Pao's house together. Since I didn't know what to expect from this visit, I was impatient and terrified. I knew he'd been pursuing Jan for a long time, but she rejected him on numerous occasions. Deep down, I suspected that he was linked to the disappearance of Jan's body. We broke the door, opened it, and rushed inside. The whole house reeked, with the stench of death making us both instantly nauseous and on the verge of vomiting. We didn't think about what we were doing. We just entered each room with our noses covered, only to find Jan's body lying on a bed against the wall. Pal was hugging and lulling the corpse to sleep, and on the wall behind, a large crimson sea seemed to be blessing the macabre embrace. Just like in my dream, Jan was wearing a crimson bridal gown, but it was no longer pretty and immaculate. The whole dress was covered with a brownish, wet filth, as the rotting flesh had perspired through the fabric. Critters were surrounding the decaying corpse. They were busy feasting on the shreds of skin and the various matters that had oozed out of the body orifices. Amidst the horror, Jan's beautiful face was now shriveled, and she looked even more grotesque with the heavy makeup that Pal had lovingly applied. The young man was indeed crazy in love. He couldn't acknowledge that she was dead, or that anything else he did was wrong. He even tried to convince the police that came to arrest him that she was very happy in his home, and that she would beg them to let him free. After what had happened, I could no longer live there, and I asked permission to leave the charity and return to Australia. The memory of this still haunts me today, and I know that people can really do anything for love, even the unthinkable. I just received word that my father's gone missing for more than a week. Until his disappearance, he'd been working as a supermarket manager in a remote small town in Japan. In a recent email, he told me a creepy story while advising me that in the event of his disappearance, or if anything happened to him, I should not start looking for him and protect myself. His tale was about a scary creature he'd encountered as a young man in Japan. 20 years ago, my father was still a graduate student and living away from his parents' home. In order to make ends meet, he used to work part-time at a local supermarket. Because the rental price of the studio he was living in was quite high, he decided to move to a cheaper room located in a quiet part of town. Sometimes my father would work rather late, and one evening, a little past 11 o'clock at night, he left the store, absolutely famished, and decided to look for a place to eat before going home, where he knew his fridge and cupboard were empty. He finally found the noodle shop and decided to enjoy a steaming hot bowl of rich paitan ramen. As he looked around the stall, he was surprised to see that it was devoid of any customer. Were the noodles that bad? After all, it wasn't that late. The owner was sternly standing behind the counter, his face covered by a mask and glasses, and a flat hat on the top of his head. At first, my father thought what an eccentric man he was, unless he had some kind of a deformity on his face and hides it so as not to frighten the customers away. My father was ravenous and excitedly ordered a bowl of paitan ramen with all the trimmings. After a short while, the owner stepped from behind the counter with a piping hot bowl of incredibly delicious noodles. How could this simple, nondiscreet noodle shop in this secluded neighborhood offer such delicacies? Greedily and happily slurping his noodles, my father thought how lucky he'd been to find this absolute culinary gem, and was all the more surprised to be the only diner. Suddenly, the shopkeeper pulled a sign down saying closed, right in front of my father, without uttering a single word. He then rushed behind the counter and began cleaning up the dishes, pans, and other likes. My father saw that and finished up his meal quickly before paying and thanking him. The owner accepted the money without saying anything. The following days, every night after work, my famished father would stop by to satisfy his hunger with the different varieties of delicious ramen available. Each time, the owner would wear the same kitchen whites, the same face mask, and the same hat. He would not utter a single word, remained expressionless, and would stare at my father eating until he would pull down his closed sign and accept his money without a nod or even a thank you. In fact, my father had many times hoped to strike up conversation since there were no other customers to accommodate, but to no avail. One evening, my father thought of going with friends for dinner after work. He invited his best friend from work to come over to the shop to eat the delicious noodles. Both excitedly walked up the alley in anticipation of the delightful meal. But when they arrived, the noodle stall was nowhere to be found. Where and why had it disappeared? My father scratched his head in confusion and embarrassment. Why is it that the stall is open every day except when he comes with friends? My father looked around and didn't know what to say. But his friend took no umbrage nor offense and suggested that they come back another time. However, my father felt bad about this awkward event. He soon noticed that every time he'd go alone, the noodle truck was there open, whereas when he'd go with his friend, the stall would be closed or absent. He repeatedly asked the noodle man as to why he would be closed on these specific days, but each time his questions were met with a creepy silence. Feeling like he'd become an object of too much attention, my father stopped going to the noodle shop after work and started leaving work earlier or walking home using a different itinerary. But no matter what, he still encountered the cart on his way. My father had figured out that the noodle man was peculiar and probably had a troubled history. He decided to learn more about him, and he was shocked at what he found out. Yet he still didn't believe it and wanted to see the truth for himself. A few days later, he deliberately left work late and walked up the usual alley to meet the street vendor. Even though he was shivering deep down, his heart beating wildly, my father still managed to keep his composure and walked up to the owner. He pointed at a bowl of shiro ramen and asked him to add more vegetables and meat. He looked over the counter to pick up the bowl, but suddenly screamed that it was filled with large, fat worms. Upon hearing so, the owner immediately bent down to look at the bowl of noodles. Taking that opportunity, my father violently pulled away the mask from the man's face, immediately exposing his shocking and staggering physiology. His face was flat without contours. His skin was smooth and taut. He had neither eyes nor hair and was all the more frightening. My father just had a confirmation of what he feared all along. The man was, in fact, the faceless ghost. Legend has it that whenever a faceless ghost preys on someone, it will appear at any time and won't let that person go. It'll follow the victim wherever they go and constantly appear on their path until they die. My father did manage to escape then. However, the spirit warned him that he would return every 20 years until he was found. This year marks the 20th anniversary of this cryptic story. My father wanted me to be psychologically prepared in the event of his disappearance. But my gut was telling me that something was terribly wrong. It all began to feel so real. Could some outrageous, cryptic horror story really be true? It's been a week now, and I feel that I have to do something quickly. I flew to Japan searching for my father. Upon arriving at the address I was given, I knocked on the door, but no one immediately answered. Then I banged harder on the door. I could hear the sound of my father's warm voice greeting me. His voice grew louder as he neared the door, but oddly, no other sounds could be heard, not even the sound of his footsteps. After a minute or two, the old wooden door began to slowly open with the squeaking sound of the hinges. Then, upon entering, I began looking around. None of the lights or electrical appliances seemed to work. The only light I had was coming from the dim light of a flickering candle burning at the far end of the hallway. Then I saw a pile of my father's clothes in a heap on the floor in a dark corner, as though he'd just stepped out of them and completely vanished right where he was standing. All that remained was a straw hat next to his clothes and a battery-powered cassette player with my father's voice. It must have been programmed to turn on automatically from the vibration of my pounding on the door. Then, out of thin air, I heard a different voice, not human sounding. I felt the presence of some spirit evil creature who began saying in a demonic voice, "You should not have come here. Welcome to your nightmare." Afterwards, the police conducted an investigation. They followed the trail left from my cell phone. After arriving, the police reported finding 2 cell phones and 2 piles of clothes. After the investigation, news sources reported 2 missing people who'd never been seen again, along with a letter that warned, "There is real evil in this world. Be careful when these doors are opened. Your nightmares become a reality." Killer crocodile on the camping trip to hell. Hello everyone, I'm Doron, your guide. Very nice to meet you. Does everyone like camping? Most people are fond of it. I also loved it too. Telling scary nighttime stories while sitting around the campfire enjoying the twinkling stars above. But let me tell you about the most horrible camping trip I ever experienced during my junior year in high school. I'll never go camping again after my weekend journey from hell. Our homeroom teacher secretly arranged a surprise weekend getaway at a pristine nature reserve where we planned to spend a night camping alongside a beautiful hidden lake surrounded by a huge natural untouched forest wilderness area. After a 30-minute bus ride, we arrived at our destination and were warmly greeted by our wilderness guide. Our story began with the bustling sounds of excitement while putting our tents up under a large group of shade trees. We then divided our class into 6 small groups of 4. Each group had been assigned its own small boat, and after our teacher gave us the green light to go, we all climbed aboard our tiny boat. As scheduled, we planned to row around the lake, enjoying the scenery, and then returning back for the barbecue. The groups began to paddle, following the instructions of Tony, our guide, who came with us. As we were happily talking and laughing, Tony suddenly screamed, "Crocodile!" For a split second, we thought it was a joke. But no, it was really happening. The horror spread like wildfire. Everyone immediately began rowing back in a fury of panic. I stood up on the boat, my eyes following the direction shown by Tony's finger, and there it was. I could clearly see the crocodile's evil green stare. The reptile began emerging from the water, huge and aggressive, repeatedly pushing our boat with his muzzle. It was then that our boat tipped violently. We all froze with fear, although Tony, Mark, and Lita began screaming and crying out for their lives. Our teacher yelled, urging the rest of the class to calm down and get to the shore as quickly as possible. The ferocious beast had attacked our boat, and at some point the boat capsized. Quick as lightning, the crocodile charged us with its wide, massive open mouth and the darkness of his throat. I could see its sharp teeth and the saliva dripping from his mouth. I was so terrified, I froze, as if I were hypnotized. In a blink of an eye, it sank its jaw into Mark's left shoulder and pulled him deep into the water. A few bubbles came to the surface, followed by a red cloud of blood. We had no doubt about Mark's fate any longer. Tony then began yelling at the rest of us to swim as fast as possible to the shore. In the extreme panic, I thought I'd seen a closer area where we could safely find refuge. Tony then confirmed to Alita to swim in that direction instead. I really believed the crocodile had gone for good, but as I was getting nearer to what I thought was our safe haven, I almost choked. On the shore in front of us lay a large group of nearly a dozen angry crocodiles, basking in the warm sun, right where we'd planned to swim to safety. As I turned around in the water to warn my friends, I could see our teacher coming to us in his boat, motioning us to swim slowly toward him as not to wake up the slumbering beasts. We managed to hold our breath and swim efficiently enough that we were almost able to climb aboard the boat. But as Tony was stepping into the boat, we heard a startled, scared A crocodile had just shot up like an arrow, with his open mouth, attempting to bite off his leg. We all screamed at once in panic. When was this nightmare going to end? Thank God, Tony had managed to keep his balance and didn't fall into the water. It turned out the monster had only bitten into his prosthetic leg. We were almost too afraid to climb aboard, so our teacher immediately suggested we swim toward the forest where no reptiles were in sight. As I saw, it was leading to the road that would bring us back to the safe shore. We swam like madmen and luckily found a ranger station nearby. They helped us to get to our base camp to reunite with the rest of the class. Just a few hours later, police and rescue teams were present at the scene, conducting a search for Mark's body. But just as we feared, all they found was Mark's torn and tattered shirt. The subsequent investigation revealed that a nearby crocodile farm had carelessly not tended to the broken fence surrounding the farm, allowing the crocodiles to escape into the lake. This was definitely the most horrible camping trip I ever experienced. This was also the last time I saw Mark, whom I shall never forget.
One full weekend, Fallon and I went wild boar hunting the mountains. We had heard of new hunting grounds that were supposed to be particularly scenic and whose wild game was incredible. It took us 5 hours by car to reach the entrance of the park, followed by a 2-hour hike to be at the specific area, which was said to have the most wild boars. On the occasion of this trip, Fallon gave me a gun as a gift. I was so glad and excited that I immediately threw it over my shoulder. It looked really cool. At the beginning of the hunting expedition, the first animal that we encountered was a deer. Yet we were so engrossed in our quest for a wild boar that we left the path to go deep inside the forest. And inevitably, we got lost. Both Fallon and I had been Boy Scouts and had the necessary orientation skills, yet it was still impossible to find our way out of the dense woods. After what felt like an eternity, we finally found a trail. At the end of the trail, our ray of hope was materializing in the form of a wooden house, presumably a former hostel or lodge that looked like it had been abandoned a long time ago. My friend and I still decided to go inside to take a break and grab a bite. Fallon then remembered the park had a research center that dated back to wartime, and we figured this was it. As we stepped inside, we discovered a large space filled with charred wood, the tile floor littered with what looked like coals and fragments of animal bones, as well as several scattered shovels. At the back of the room, a bed was nestled in a corner and was covered with a blanket, as if someone was still sleeping there. We figured this person had just left for the day and would be back any time, possibly to help us find the trail back. But before I could even drop my backpack on the floor, I heard a strange noise coming from the front door. A gray-haired, bearded old man appeared at the doorstep with a hunting rifle pointing in our direction, looking at us with fierce eyes and an angry expression. Fallon and I raised our hands in panic, and I immediately told him to stay calm, as we were lost and simply needed help. He almost interrupted me and yelled, "Tony, time to eat," before laughing hysterically and slamming the door shut behind him. We immediately heard a wild roar and the noise of an animal scratching the floor and running in place. Panic hit both of us, and we froze in terror. But in the blink of an eye, Fallon was thrown in the air, screaming his lungs out. What was happening? While I tried to make sense of this crazy situation, a monster was staring at me, growling, and its mouth was covered in blood. I could see it more clearly now, and it looked very much like a human being, but didn't fully stand up. It was very muscular, extremely hairy, and with abnormal large shoulders. The monster gained momentum before charging towards me, but he was sufficiently far that I was able to pull out my gun and quickly fire several bullets towards his chest. The beast was hit by several shots and went crazy, howling and getting much nearer. Before I could react, I was lifted into the air and pressed against the wall. The monster was squeezing my neck, and the more I struggled, the more the grip got tighter. It seemed that my shots worked, and I could feel the monster gradually losing its strength until it completely released me. It then fell backwards, panting heavily. The man had witnessed the whole scene and ran to him, hugged him tight, and cried heavily. After losing so much blood, the monster stopped breathing a few minutes later, and the frail old man was all sobs and tears, as if mourning the monster. He didn't show any sign of resistance as I tied him up and used his cell phone to call 911. While we waited for the ambulance and the police to arrive, he started explaining that the monster lying in the pool of blood was his son. Following a brief illness, his teenage son fell into a coma, with most of his organs having failed. All the best hospitals and doctors had given up, but the father wouldn't pull the plug on his son and decided to put use what he had learned from his research during the war. He traveled the world looking for organs from donors to be transplanted into his son. It took him a few years, and the process was long and tedious, with numerous medical setbacks. But one day, his son came back to life. Alive he was, but completely changed inside and outside. In other words, and despite his best intentions, the old man had turned his son into a monster. Since his resurrection, the previously polite and affable young man could only mumble and mutter grunts. He could no longer walk properly and would prefer to crawl, but more importantly, he had turned into a bloodthirsty beast who would only spare his father. The latter, aware that his son was now completely abnormal and a hazard for anyone near him, decided to move for good to the forest, far away from civilization. A short while later, as I was safely back home, I made another horrible discovery while Googling the old man. The experiments that he and his colleagues had conducted during the war gave way to the Hiroshima and Kawasaki hecatombs.
Hello, my name is Brian, and I'm a detective within the Chicago Police Department. In the course of my investigating career, I've encountered my share of horrific and disturbing cases. But one case in particular has been haunting me and my colleagues until now. And today I will tell you all about it. And with the exception of the police and a couple law enforcement officers, no one else ever knew about it. See, the case wasn't even disclosed to the press, given how horrifying it was. The year was 1998. I was patrolling the city when the police radio dispatcher reported that a serious accident had just occurred 2 blocks away from my location. I naturally rushed to the scene, where I saw a car had crashed into a pizza parlor around the corner. The driver had apparently lost control of the vehicle and landed in the pizza parlor. Fortunately, there was no one in the kitchen, and the driver only suffered light injuries. My colleagues and I went inside to examine the crash more closely, and that's when we stumbled upon an absolutely horrifying secret. At the scene, we discovered a severed arm lying on the ground in front of the car, surrounded by shards of broken glass. Upon seeing this, the pizza parlor owner next to us immediately turned pale and fell to the floor. Something didn't click with the owner, and my guts were telling me there was something suspicious about him. I casually asked to have a look around the kitchen, and after a brief hesitation at first, he allowed us to carry out our mission. We were quite thorough in our search, and after a while, I began to wonder whether we would find anything that would help us with our investigation. But then I saw the freezer had been partially hit open by the car, and I immediately got the feeling that this was where the severed limb was coming from. In fact, it was mostly filled with ham, bacon, crab sticks, etc. The usual suspects when it comes to a pizzeria. But as I got closer, I discovered that there were 2 larger freezers hidden behind it. I began moving the bacon boxes, and there it was. The most horrific, disturbing, and nauseating sight ever. A messy heap of human limbs and heads that had been violently cut and ripped apart before being thrown into this trash bag. I could still clearly identify a chunk of flesh presumably removed from a large pelvis. We continued taking a look around and found another trash bag, this one filled with balls of tangled hair, and from the look of them, the nails were pulled off. This made me realize that we would find at least 2 corpses in this kitchen. Still in shock and sick to our guts, we turned around as the owner started confessing to his revolting murders in a monotonous, detached voice. He explained without flinching that he was using human meat instead of pork to make his highly popular gourmet pizzas. The owner also added that the 2 bodies lying at the bottom of the freezer were those of 2 security patrol officers. Following a personal conflict, he said he had accidentally killed both of them in a heated argument and figured out that the easiest way to cover up his crime and get rid of the bodies was to turn the flesh into pizza meat toppings. To think that hundreds of happy customers, including me, had raved about his fabulous and delicious pies. If only they knew their unique flavor came from human flesh. How revolting and disgusting. I can't help but shiver and feel nauseous. We thought our case was closed and brought the owner to trial. But while in court, his son screamed and hysterically jumped out of his seat crying and ran toward the judge to confess. He explained that he was the one who had killed the 2 men, who were in fact thugs that racketed him. They had made him give away his pocket money on a daily basis in exchange for not being molested. One day, he had no money to give them and was beaten up badly. His father had witnessed the scene from the back of the parlor. As he was going towards them to the end of the beating, he suddenly saw his son pulling out a long knife and stabbing the 2 bullies in the chest, filled with rage and anger. He was quick to hit them precisely, so much that both of them immediately collapsed and died soon after in a pool of blood. Having watched the horrific scene, the father was at first both panicked and petrified. But after a couple of minutes of shock, he instinctively ran toward the dead bodies and dragged them into the kitchen, out of anyone else's sight. He was also quick to clean up the bloody, incriminating murder scene. To cover up for his son and dispose of the bodies, he dismembered the corpses and stored them in a freezer, which he began using as his special pizza secret ingredients. If the car had not crashed into the parlor, this secret would most likely have been buried forever, and his secret recipe still causing a sensation and much speculation. I still cannot get over that horrific case, and don't think I ever will. Oh, and I don't eat pizza anymore.
I'm Peter, a poor student. It was so tough for me to get a job as a deliverer at an unsettled pizza store near my home. I'm not very interested in the fact that I'm going to work here permanently, but right now it's the best job I can find. One day, when I was on my shift as usual, an answer on behalf of the store owner. It was around 9 p.m. and it was just an hour before the shop was closed. A new order sound from the store's iPad rang. Damn it! Who the hell is ordering pizza now? But after that, I went ahead and opened the order to see. There was a customer ordering a large, thick pizza. The address was about 5 kilometers from my store. I immediately confirmed the order and read the note inside the app that after delivering to the place, please put pizza in front of the door and receive money in the slot. Although it was a bit confusing to understand, I quickly took the pizza and proceeded to deliver it in time. I was running through the busy traffic of the street at night looking for the right address in the hope of finishing my work as soon as possible. Until I found the address of the building. It was a dormitory area with no main doors but only an iron staircase built on the side of the building connected to the upper floors. I carefully locked the car parking at the bottom of the stairs and carried the food up. I searched for the right address, went to apartment 08. I knocked on the door for a while but no one answered. I started to doubt whether this was really a ridiculous joke of someone. At that time, I imagined that I would punch the guest on the face because of his trick. Fortunately, my patience has paid off. The door opened slowly, but no one came out. Money was neatly arranged in the door slot. At this moment, I just remembered the note inside the app. I quickly picked up the money, carefully counted it, then put the pizza box with a charge in front of the door for the eccentric guest and wished them good appetite. After that, I went downstairs and started the car to drive away. As soon as I got back to the store to return my car in uniform, I received an evaluation message from the system. The eccentric guest rated my delivery at 5 stars. In addition, there was no other compliment. Day by day, I kept getting the same call from the same number all the time. The address not changed, and even the way of the deliveries the same as the first. At first I seemed uncomfortable because of the cold attitude of the customer that he always left the money at the door, not even looking at me and greeting me just only one time, but gradually I felt familiar. For 4 days in a row I delivered this phone number and address, until the 5th time as usual. I rushed over and did my duty. But looking up from the bottom, I was quite surprised that standing in front of the door was a large group of people talking quite loudly. I didn't think it's my client's house, but unexpectedly everything I didn't want to happen always happened to me. An intense stench came from the house the customer had ordered from. It was like the smell of a dead rat's body, mixed with the smell of stinking food. When I looked inside, I saw in the middle of the house the body of an old big man lying with the face down on the floor. Police quickly appeared and conducted a scene examination. They carried the body of this man on a gurney. It was swelled up, its stench unbearable, because the body was filled with muckworms inside. However, it was so weird that the two arms of the man were absolutely severed. The police began to rummage the house to see if there was anything abnormal inside. Another policeman examined the pocket of the man and took out an old cell phone. They searched the diary and called the nearest phone number. Unknowingly, the store phone in my pocket rang loudly. I looked at the people with bewildered eyes and met the suspicious eyes of the neighbors and the police. I didn't even remember what I said at that time, because in my mind it was too stressful, especially when I was listed as a suspect of the murder case and the body was the one who ordered food at my store. When the police announced the autopsy results, the man had died 5 days ago. It was also the first day I received a delivery order to this evil address. There was a lot of absurdity between myself and the police. How can a dead person order a pizza? However, because there was no evidence to accuse me of murder, I was soon released by the police during the period of investigation. I was not allowed to go anywhere from my locality during this time. Fortunately, people in the store trusted me, so no one took me as a real killer. Until one day I received a letter from the police. They sent me an apology for misunderstanding me and wasting my time, as well as thanking me for cooperating with them to investigate the case. According to the first results, the man died of a heart attack. In the house, police also find a few of his medical records and a few bottles of heart attack medicine. But strangely, in his phone at that time, there was no number or contact information for relatives or anyone else. Police immediately proceeded to take testimony of neighbors living around the house. They said that the old man was an eccentric man. He lived alone in the moldy apartment and often locked himself in the house, not talking to anyone, and no one had ever seen his descendants visit him once. Occasionally, they also heard several voices coming from inside his home. I thought in my mind, maybe this man had multiple personalities, because I have heard people with this disease often have a bit of talking to their ego. The more I thought about it, the more I felt scared, especially when I thought of the person who ordered my pizza and asked me to deliver it to the house of a dead body. A few days later, I heard shocking news. After searching the man's apartment, the police discovered some strange small footprints appear inside, leading to the kitchen. Police also found a way leading into a perfectly covered small basement. In the basement, there was a big lack of light. The basement was also extremely humid and stinky. In the room, police found roughly a 13-year-old girl. She was discovered in a state of panic, severe traumatic trauma and frail physical condition due to long-term hunger. More terrifyingly, the police found many black bones in a corner of the basement. A shocking truth had been uncovered, that the man was a biological father. Since his wife left home, he had raised their daughter alone. This man did not allow her to leave the house. He said it was dangerous outside, strangers would harm her, and that only he loved her the most in the world. She was always locked inside that cellar. He only fed her, completely isolated her from the civilized world. Abusively, he sexually abused her. Each time she resisted or did something making him vexed, he immediately locked the girl into the basement. Until the day he had a heart attack and died. She opened up the cellar herself and went out. As soon as she came to the living room, she saw him lying there, so naive that she thought he was just sleeping. However, many days passed and he just laid there without talking or feeding her anymore. There are many scary things that I cannot explain. That after he died, the phone continued to order my store's pizza and also rated 5 stars as before. I thought it might have been because of the girl. Later on, because the phone ran out of battery, she couldn't order pizza anymore and ate the man. It's even more insane when I think it might be because the man's soul died suddenly, and he might think that he was alive and his soul was still doing the same job as when he was alive. But whatever the truth is, it was the most intimidating story I've ever seen in my delivery profession. Hi, today I will tell you my own story. It could be said that it was my obsession during my college years, and it took me a lot of time to overcome that dark memory. I even lost my best friend. One day, students in my college were suddenly spreading rumors about a video posted on private groups of the college. In the video, there was a second-year female student in a nude state changing in the women's toilet. That's not all. I saw below in the comment section that there were obscene, vulgar words and not very good comments about the girl's body. As for me, a simple person who doesn't like to gossip, I really do not care about this video at all. Not even bothering to join those secret groups despite having been at college for 2 years. As usual, after the class ended, I went down to the cafeteria for lunch. While walking, I took a phone call from Vera, my best friend. Today, Vera also had a class at the college and we normally had lunch appointments at this time. Normally with my calls, Vera only takes about 5 seconds to pick up. But for some unknown reason, today I made 3 consecutive calls and still had not heard from Vera. Having a bad premonition, I hurriedly put my phone into my pocket and cycled straight to Vera's house. When I arrived, her mother said that since this morning Vera had locked herself in a room, refused to go to school, nor bothered to eat or drink, and her mom didn't know why. I asked permission for Vera's mother to come in, and then headed to my friend's room in bewilderment. The door was locked. There was no sound inside. I softly knocked on the door and called her. It took a long time for Vera to appear with a swollen face, messy hair. Seemingly she was crying. Seeing me, Vera hugged me in tears. I did not say nor ask anything because I knew letting her cry was the greatest comfort for her at that stage. After she calmed down, I asked my best friend about what happened. Vera wiped her tears away, sobbingly told me everything. It turned out that the victim in the toilet clip was Vera. She felt really hurt when her body was made fun of and talked about, and even insulted by all those people on the internet. Listening to her, my tears suddenly flowed. I hugged my friend tightly and comforted her. All afternoon I was with Vera, trying my best to persuade her to believe that everything will fall into oblivion and no one will even remember the video anymore. When talking to me, Vera's mood seemed to have stabilized. She also finished the glass of milk that her mother brought up. After Vera got better, I went back to school because I had 2 more classes left. I thought everything was fine, but unexpectedly, early in the morning, I suddenly received a call from Vera's house, announcing that Vera had taken sleeping pills to kill herself last night. She was severely depressed because of the video and the obscene comments about herself, so she eventually sought death to free herself. Her passing was a huge shock to her mother and me. After the death of my best friend, it took me more than a month to overcome my pain and stabilize my mood. I informed the college about what that pervert was doing, filming people, including the consequences he caused, but it seemed that the college still had no action to resolve this incident. And then, that disgusting thing happened to me. One afternoon, we had swimming lessons. After the class ended, the whole class stayed in the school pool until late at night to have fun and practice some more. So I came home that night at 7 o'clock, and it was about 9 p.m. when I remembered that I left my phone in the dressing room next to the pool. After the security's consent, I rushed to the dressing room next to the pool. It wouldn't have been anything special if I hadn't accidentally discovered a stranger hidden in the dressing area. I should have immediately gone back after I got the phone, but my tough-hearted nature forced me to look out for who it was. I gathered up my courage, carefully took each step silently, and tried not to make a sound. When I got closer, I saw a man in a black top who was stealthily putting the camera in the girls' changing room. My whole body was trembling, but still trying to keep calm, my hand holding my mouth, trying not to scream. Then carefully I hid under the stairs to avoid being detected. I have never felt so nervous and worried like in this moment. My heart was beating so fast, I could not even breathe. Holding the phone while non-stop trembling, I picked up the phone to take a photo of the pervert, but I forgot to turn off the sound of the phone. A click sounded. The pervert immediately discovered my presence. Oh, my mind was empty. I couldn't think anymore. I clumsily dropped the phone and ran away. Behind me, the black hooded pervert was also frantically chasing me, not giving me a chance to escape. When my strength became exhausted, when my legs were about to collapse from running, I was lucky to see a nearby storage warehouse, and I rushed inside and closed the door. Then gradually retreated to a corner of the old wet room, which was full of cockroaches, centipedes and spider webs. A dark space covered me, while outside was the sound of the door banging and cursing of the pervert. The fear had taken over my mind. All I could do was to sit still and pray. A moment later, all of a sudden, everything became silent. I thought that the bad guy had left. But unexpectedly, a loud noise rang, interrupting my thoughts. The pervert was using an axe to shatter the door. Seeing the sharp iron axe, I could no longer calm down. I panicked and shouted. But my scream could not stop the door from being gradually destroyed. I knew at that moment I had to be really alert so that I was able to find a solution. The luck again came to me. After looking around the old room, I found a ventilated hatch cover. After that, I lifted my body, opened the hatch and climbed inside. though I did not know this tunnel would lead to somewhere, but this was my only and last hope. Because the tunnel was small, I had to move with both my arms and legs. Use my best to crawl as quickly as possible in a dark and dusty hole. The fear and tightness made it impossible for me to breathe. But thinking about Vera, thinking about the people who were perverted by the bad guy, I gained the motivation to keep going forward. When I was able to move a bit, I heard from behind me something starting to make noises. It seemed that the pervert had found out and was chasing me through the hole. The closer the noise got, the fear in me grew bigger and bigger. Sweat drenched all over my shirt. My arms, my knees began to hurt, and there were some scratches and blood leaking out. Besides, my body gradually ran out of energy. The moment all of my willpower faded away in the dark tunnel, a light suddenly flashed. I took a deep breath, used the last remaining energy, quickly crawled to where the light was coming from. Fortunately, the end of the tunnel was the outside hall of the college. To be honest, at that time my body had no energy, but I tried to stay awake, trying to get up with my will and rush to run for help. After a while, the security guard and 2 convenience store staff members next to him followed my instructions, and the pervert was also arrested. The funny thing was that he was too fat and stuck in the ventilation tunnel. Otherwise, I couldn't know what would happen to me. After that, the police were present and took him to the police headquarters. At the police station, the pervert had confessed all of his depraved behavior, and the evidence that could never be more true for his crimes was the camera in the dressing room. When checking his personal computer, it contained all the data about the ill-fated victims and videos that had claimed Vera's life. After that horrible night, it took a long time for me psychologically to return to normal. But no matter what, that dark memory seemed to be an obsession throughout all my life. Hello, I'm Egan. Perhaps all of us have a passion for football, but to me the ball is an unforgettable obsession. My family is Protestant, of course. I don't believe in evil, but my mind has changed since I had an incident in my last year of high school. From an early age, I have shown my athletic ability. Unlike other children, I enjoy playing underwater. That's why my parents signed me up for a swimming class. By the end of the elementary school, I mastered swimming. Of course, when I was in high school, although I was busier, I still didn't give up my passion. I joined a swimming club. To try my best, I also registered to compete in amateur competitions and luckily got some outstanding achievements. It can be said that I am a person who loves to challenge myself, so on a nice day I decided to pause swimming to switch to a new topic. With the permission of my parents, I joined Lion 2, a football club which was also quite famous in the school. Although I had to start everything at zero, I really liked that new feeling. I energetically asked my parents to buy me a super good pair of soccer shoes. But at the first training session, I was allowed to sit on the bench and watch my team members play. Of course, the new shoes also did not step into any grass from the football field. I went home that day feeling very depressed. I remembered the feeling of being a star when I was at the swimming club. With football, I was nothing. But thanks to the encouragement of my family, I quickly regained my spirit. The enthusiasm to conquer my limits was arising again. At the second training session, luckily I was allowed to play and start being trained. It turned out that the new members were to sit on the bench to test their patience and will to learn, and that it was also an occasion to observe the old members and draw their own lessons. If I had given up the day before and not stayed to the team, I would probably be ashamed by now. At this training session, I began to realize I had a lot of limitations. Unlike swimming, training skills from childhood makes everything simpler. As for football, it was all new. When I watched the television, I thought the controlling ball was simple as spreading your arms and swimming, but the truth was, it was much harder. But instead of being bored and wanting to give up like the first day I came to the line too, I was more determined to conquer it. After practice sessions with the team, I usually stayed another 2 hours to review what I had learned and left when it was already dark. At first there were a few new numbers eager to join in practice, but gradually they gave up and eventually I was alone. But it was still fine. Practicing soccer alone made me more free and comfortable because no one could see me. I always believed that I was definitely the last to leave. However, one day I realized I was not the only one. I saw a figure who was training as hard as me in the opposite field. I thought in my mind, should I ask him to play with me? But after a few seconds of observing his professional playing style, I immediately erased that intention, because I thought that my slowness would annoy him a lot. The weird thing was that whenever I stayed late, I would see him. The boy in the opposite field even practiced extremely hard and enthusiastically without a moment of rest. Although I had met him many times, I still could not see the face of him, because that corner was quite dark. I had no idea why he didn't go to a brighter place to play football. But that was not what I cared about. The only thing I paid attention to was the ability to control the ball of a friend on the opposite field. As a newcomer to the Lion 2 team, I was not really sure if the person was in my club or not, but I could assure you that he was a very potential striker. Although I did not dare to approach or start talking to him, I did not know when the friend in the opposite field became the motivation to help me conquer the round ball. I had to confess that I had secretly followed that person and later learned some many tricks. Thanks to that, my skills were improved much more. Many seniors in the club were extremely surprised by my progress. Although we have seen each other many times, but it was not until the night of the 8th or the 9th on the football field that I really had my first interaction with that friend in the opposite field. That day when I was practicing, I accidentally kicked the ball hard and it flew to the opposite side of the football field. Then I saw the ball rolling towards him. He stopped. I did not dare to speak. After 15 minutes, that weird friend started moving and went to the ball, picked it up and threw it to me. Somehow, his hand movements were very, very gentle, but the ball flew far away, over the high fence like kicking with his feet. I didn't really care about the weirdness. I hurriedly took my ball and thanked my friend at the opposite field. But the person didn't respond, coldly returning to continue his training. At that time, I simply thought that he must be eccentric, unapproachable. I put the ball in the bag and came back home because it was already dark. The next day, I practiced kicking the ball into the golf course, but my feet kept disobeying by kicking with the excess of strength. The ball continuously flew over the fence to the opposite field. Strangely, every time, the boy returned the ball to me without a complaint and, of course, didn't care at all about my thanks or hellos or goodbyes. That day, because the practice was too intense, it was not known at all hours. Luckily, I was near the entrance, so I figured it would be time to be locked up for the night. As I hurried up, cleaned up, I remembered my friend in the opposite field. Looking over, it turned out he was just like me, forgetting the closing time of the training ground. In order to repay his kindness, I immediately asked the security guard for 5 minutes more. So I walked towards that person. It seems that he also noticed that someone was approaching him and he stopped. Because he was standing in a light blocking position, so it was unable for a nearsighted person to see clearly from afar, I just relied on the shadow to follow the boy. But when I approached, I did not see the shadow of the person anymore. Looking over the side, I saw a ball rolling from the corner of the alley. A cold breeze from somewhere rushed and made the back of my spine unconsciously cool. I instinctively grabbed the rolling ball. As I hugged the ball, my head hit someone's chest. I did not expect this boy to have such a solid and tall body. However, that admiration was immediately suppressed when I looked upwards. I was startled when I found out the terrifying thing in front of me. The big man didn't have a head. Meanwhile, his body still moved like a normal person. He reached out his hand forward as if signaling me to give him the ball back. At this time, my body was trembling with fear. Sweat was drenched all over my shirt. My limbs were soft, teeth were clenched, trying to keep my mind as awake as possible. But as soon as he looked down, the calmness immediately reached its limit. The object in my hand right now was not a ball anymore, but a human head. Unable to suppress my emotions, I involuntarily let out a scream, then threw the head to the ground and my legs trembled backwards. But unfortunately, while I tried to escape, I stumbled on a barrier. The body that had lost all strength immediately fell down and lost consciousness after that. The next morning I woke up on my beloved bed. It took me a week to get rid of my obsession and return to normal. And on the first day back to school, I was summoned by the police to testify for a case. It turned out, after the day I lost consciousness in the football field, the people who worked there smelled the stench. After searching, they discovered a body crammed under an old warehouse containing the equipment of the soccer field in a state of decapitation. It seemed that the corpse was of a male student my age. The perpetrator was charged when police gathered enough evidence at the scene as well as verification based on cameras around the area. According to the police investigation, the victim was a member of the Lion 2 team and the male student was killed by his own team member because of a personal conflict. That incident became my obsession. I couldn't continue playing football nor return to swimming, partly because of these terrible things I've encountered. And I'm also a senior. I need to focus on my studies anyway.
Hi, my name is Jonathan. Recently, a very strange story came up on my school's forum. Rumor had it that a model skeleton from the biology lab would walk at night in the school's corridors. To corroborate this, I invited Leo and Mila, two friends from the press club, to bring a camera along and catch this peculiar occurrence on film. That night, none of us had any homework, so we made an appointment outside the cafeteria, and from there went to hide in a corner near the lab to begin filming. At midnight, the whole school was quiet, and we were ready with our well-prepared equipment to record that spooky sight once it would happen. However, after waiting for over an hour, we still had not seen any skeletons. Mila walked first, but suddenly she screamed. The skeleton had mysteriously disappeared. It was no longer standing in the right corner of the room, as it usually did. We went around the room several times, but we still couldn't find it. Leo suggested that we split the group up to go to other rooms and try to find the skeleton. God, I wish we hadn't separated then. Indeed, a very upsetting thing happened as Leo and Mila walked towards the end of the corridor. They were assaulted by a madman who had covered his head. He was hiding in a corner and suddenly hit them for no reason. At that moment, I was searching a nearby classroom, and as I was about to step out, I managed to witness everything. I was so scared that I crept into the corner of the room to hide, hoping that he would not find me. But no, I heard footsteps coming towards me, getting closer and closer. Then I heard him opening the door of the room where I was hiding. I was so afraid that he'd catch me. But all of a sudden, the sound of something falling came from another corner. This caught the man's attention, and he quickly turned his head towards it. Perhaps because he didn't find anything, he finally left. I heard his footsteps fade away, and the room fell silent again. I breathed a sigh of relief, but then I was startled by the sight of the skeleton waving at me from behind the window. For some reason, I had a feeling that it made that noise in order to distract the crazy man, and therefore save me. I rubbed my eyes again to make sure I wasn't dreaming, but the skeleton was gone. I then thought that perhaps the crazy man had not gone, so I ran into the biology lab to hide in a large box. This was surely the most disgusting thing I'd ever experienced. The box was full of frogs that had been disemboweled for experimental purposes, and their revolting stench kept wafting up my nose. However, I was sure Leo and Mila were waiting for me to save them. So I clenched my teeth and ventured outside the box. As I was stepping out, I faced a horrifying sight. A tall, unknown man was opening the door of the lab, dragging at once my two friends, Mila and Leo, inside. He laid Leo on the operating table, while Mila was on the next one. Both of them were unconscious. He then slowly lifted a scalpel and began dissecting Leo's body while laughing hysterically like a madman. What was going on? It was too horrific to handle, and I couldn't stop trembling, so much that my hands couldn't open the box to look outside. Still, I tried to stay calm and dial 911 to call the police. I then realized what an error it was to hide in this crazy cold freezer. I was shivering so much, I didn't know how long I could endure these unholy temperatures. But I took a deep breath and tried once again to slightly open the door to see if the murderer had gone. This is when I saw him bringing the scalpel towards Mila. Suddenly, lightning started flashing outside the window, and a skeleton appeared, leaving the murderer standing, dumbfounded. I took this opportunity to quickly jump out and grab the closest fire extinguisher to smash his head. However, my clumsiness and haste caused me to slip on a pool of blood and fall on the floor. He rushed towards me, trying to strangle me, but by chance, the police were storming in just in time. Unfortunately, the madman had already managed to put a knife on my throat to try and control me. As he was about to stab me in the neck, a light suddenly flashed, once again coming from outside and surrounding a skeleton. Gunfire immediately rang out, and the police managed to shoot him down. It turned out that the psycho was in fact the head of the school's biology department. But a terrifying secret was later revealed. He was in fact schizophrenic, and while he was still capable of working very normally in the classroom, he would go crazy at night and run to the lab to dissect a series of frogs and mice. One evening, a student who had forgotten something in class went back to the lab and accidentally found out the freak's secret. The lunatic was dissecting the boy while he was still alive, just to keep him silent. The most frightening thing that haunted me for a while was that the student's body was found at the bottom of the freezer, covered with heaps of frog corpses, and that's precisely where I was hiding that evening. The whole school then rumored that his spirit ascended into the skeleton, and he spent his nights moving the skeletons in the lab to hint at and reveal the madman's crime.
That year, Jonathan and I were high school freshmen, and aside from minor bullying and much more stuff to do, the school year started pretty normally. That is, until rumor had it that every night, babies were heard crying from the old shed next to the basketball court. This piqued our curiosity, so Jonathan and I decided to find out more about it and investigate. We took the opportunity of an evening basketball game to sneak into the backyard and explore the shed. To be more precise, it was an old, long-abandoned warehouse that had undergone renovation a few years ago. It was supposed to be turned into a gym, but in the end the local authorities vetoed the project. Since then, no one would venture there, not even the school security guards or teachers. The building was decrepit and sinister, and the outside lock was actually an exciting incentive for curious people such as us both to try and understand what was happening behind these large doors. We hid in the nearby empty swimming pool and waited until all the students and staff were gone. Around midnight, after much cheering and partying to celebrate the school team's victory, everyone had started leaving and, as expected, nobody noticed our absence. It soon became extremely quiet, save for a few chirping crickets and frogs, and we fully concentrated on the warehouse. Just as rumored, the wind in the backyard started blowing violently in the middle of the night, causing the trees and leaves to make rustling and chilling sounds. The shadows of the poplars created all sorts of strange and frightening shapes on the ground, and we couldn't help but watch them, totally enraptured by the eerie scene. But suddenly, a very distinct sound came from inside the warehouse. We both heard it very clearly, and it was unmistakable. It was the sound of children crying. Jonathan and I looked at each other and instinctively walked towards the shed to see if there were any children inside. Deep down, I wanted to believe this was merely the sound of a cat meowing, but when we cracked the lock open and pushed the door, it was completely dark inside. We used our cell phone flashlights and saw nothing unusual except for old, rotting pieces of furniture, dust everywhere, and cobwebs hanging from the ceiling beams. We were threading slowly, attempting to make as little noise as possible, and Jonathan was leading the way. After a few steps, Jonathan motioned me to stop and pointed to the corner of the warehouse. My gaze followed the direction of his index, and I saw the menacing silhouette of a large man. The darkness prevented us from seeing him clearly, but I mustered up my courage and I walked in his direction. As I approached, I realized that this was just an anatomy mannequin that had been left there along with maps, skulls, and an old globe. This came as a huge relief, but suddenly the sound of a crying baby came from right behind us. We immediately turned around to look, and what? We couldn't believe our eyes. A naked toddler was crawling out from the corner and slowly moving on the dusty floor. His bulging eyes were protruding so much that they seemed to be falling out from their sockets. His bluish skin was covered in sores, and as he moved, we could see his distorted navel oozing pus. Jonathan and I were so scared and horrified that all we could do was scream from the top of our lungs and run towards the exit door. It took a while for us to dare look behind our backs, as we did not want to face that stomach-churning sight again. As we arrived outside, we bumped into the school's security guard, who had been alerted by the noises and our screams. He asked us what was wrong, and we managed to falter out and answer in unison. "There's a ghost in the abandoned shed!" We then pointed in the direction of the decrepit building, but strangely, the door was locked, as if no one had ever entered. I looked at the security guard, thinking that he would not believe us, but unexpectedly, his face looked really sad. He proceeded to tell us about the tragic event that had happened inside the old dilapidated shed. Some 20 years earlier, when the school had not been remodeled yet, a young female student unintentionally became pregnant following a short-lived relationship with another male student. The school had very strict rules regarding relationships between students. And for fear of being found out by the school and her own parents, the young girl managed to hide her pregnancy thanks to ample clothing. Later, as her pregnancy was nearing its term, she sneaked into the school in the middle of the night and went to the shed alone to give birth there. Once the baby was born, the young student panicked and ran away, clueless as to what to do, and leaving the newborn behind. The poor baby died of starvation and cold and was discovered a few days later by one of the school's maintenance workers. The latter had gone into the shed to pick up gardening tools and was startled by the stench wafting from a corner of the room. He fainted as he saw the decomposing corpse of the toddler being eaten away by critters and lying in a pool of bodily fluid. Following that sad story, and as the strange noises started coming out of the building at night, students and security guards alike would reassure themselves by insisting that they were merely stray cats meowing. Today, the warehouse is still abandoned, and the sound of the crying baby still lingers in the dark night. Jonathan and I used this tragic story to write an article for the school paper that all the students thoroughly enjoyed reading. But we pretended it was purely fiction and did not dare reveal it had in fact really happened. Hi, I'm Mila, and I'm a high school sophomore. Let me tell you about Carly, a female student who recently got transferred to our class. This new girl has always been pretty weird. From the very first day, she made a strong impression on the whole class with her jet black outfit covering her from head to toe. To me, Carly has always been quite a mystery, and I've never felt completely comfortable around her. She would always lower her face and stare at the ground, be it in class or in the corridors, as if she wanted to distantiate herself from everyone. Carly also didn't speak to anyone, save for me, since we were sitting next to each other in class. Carly seemed to trust me, at least I think so. She had a beautiful face, and her steel blue eyes were just as hypnotizing as the dark lipstick she used to wear. She looked like a gothic rock star and made heads turn wherever she would go. Once, Carly told me she was afraid of light, pretexting that it would hurt her and burn her skin. This immediately reminded me of vampires and of Dracula, who are notorious light haters, but I just thought Carly had some sort of OCD or typical teenage obsession, not that she was a vampire. One weekend, Carly suggested we hang out together, and I gladly accepted. We went to the mall in the morning and planned on having lunch at the town's best barbecue joint. It was an Asian grill-it-yourself type of barbecue restaurant, where diners grill their meats themselves at the table. This makes for a fun, delicious, and interactive meal, sure to please everyone. We ordered a mixed combo, and when the waiter brought up to our plate our various raw meats, Carly explained, "These meats look so fresh and juicy." I totally agreed with her, and as such didn't think much of her enthusiasm. But as soon as the waiter left our table, having ensured we were all set to start grilling, Carly threw her arm towards the meat plate and poked into a large strip of raw sirloin. She shoved it into her mouth that I had never seen so wide open before. Her powerful jaw and sharp teeth were quick to chew the delicious flesh, blood trickling down her chin. Eyes semi-closed, she repeated this routine without interruption until the whole plate had been devoured. She seemed to be in a trance, so much that all the patrons witnessing the scene, me included, were both mesmerized and on the verge of throwing up. I tried interrupting her, pointing out that her bizarre ritual was unsettling and embarrassing, but she didn't seem to care or even hear me. I had managed to save a couple of pieces of meat and proceeded to cook them on my side of the central grill. In all honesty, I feared she would devour them just as she had the rest of the plate, but instead of staring at them greedily, she was actually looking at me intently. Following this awkward meal, Carly asked me to come to her house to help her out with her homework. For some weird reason, I immediately agreed to, without a single hesitation. That said, I instinctively took my phone and texted Jonathan that I was at Carly's, asking him to come over ASAP. Carly's house was located on a street not far from us. She opened the door, telling me that her parents were gone for the day so they wouldn't bother us. I followed her silently inside and couldn't believe what I saw. It was pitch dark with absolutely no light. All the windows were covered with black curtains, and my eyes had a hard time getting accustomed to the darkness. Carly took off her thick black coat and hung it on the wrought iron coat rack next to the entrance door. I was seeing more clearly now and was busy looking around this strange and sinister place. But suddenly Carly attacked me. She gripped my shoulders and violently bit my neck. I struggled and kicked Carly's lower legs to escape. I rushed to the door but was horrified to realize that it was locked. As I turned around, Carly was standing in front of me with an evil smirk. Was she indeed a bloodthirsty vampire? Carly's bite had begun to bleed, and I could feel the warm blood trickling down my neck. Carly was very strong, and she grabbed me in a snap, forcing me to lie down on the living room floor before biting me once again. I screamed so hard, but my lungs and eardrums nearly popped. I could very clearly feel every single blood vessel out of my body flowing toward my neck into Carly's mouth. She was sucking my blood, and she was sucking me dry. Suddenly, I heard the sound of the front door being smashed. I then saw Jonathan rush in towards me, followed by Mr. Carson, our homeroom teacher. They jumped at Carly and pulled her away from me. I was hysterical and burst into tears as Jonathan was trying to comfort me. Realizing she was in big trouble, Carly panicked and tried running away, but she was held back by Mr. Carson. I found out that Jonathan had gone to see him when he received my text message saying that I was alone with Carly at her place. Jonathan had always found Carly to be strange and wanted our homeroom teacher's advice as to what to do. Mr. Carson was aware of her case and tried to reassure me. It turned out that Carly was not a real vampire and that she suffered from clinical vampirism, otherwise known as Renfield Syndrome. As such, she was afraid of light and consumed blood in various forms. Carly's medical record was on her file, so my homeroom teacher was very worried. I was extremely lucky that both of them arrived in time. Had they not, I'm not sure I would be here to tell you my story.
This is the story of Jaden, a crime thriller writer. Jaden had never been one for social media. It took up too much of his time. He avoided it the best he could. But one day, he got an email from a fan. It was normal enough, just asking to have a chat over messages plus a link to their social media. How sweet. They want to learn more about my work. He thought as he grabbed his phone, and logged back into his long-neglected Facebook account over his profile. It was sad. Really, did no one care about this? After a month of not logging in, only one friend request outstanding? Curiosity set in. He quickly confirmed the request. It was from Jonathan Galindo. A link landed in his inbox immediately. What harm could it do? Bored and naturally curious, he clicked without hesitation. A loud, scratching, ear-piercing noise thrust from his handset. The screen was midnight black, with 2 red lines trailed from the top to the bottom, and text emerged from the black. Do the blue whale challenge, or your family will die. Bullshit was his first thought. He wasn't active on social media, but he knew enough about hoaxes and jokes to know that this was a load of rubbish. He turned his phone to silent and headed to bed. But sleep didn't come easy that night. Jaden had 1,000 questions running through his mind about the friend request that started all this. The face was somehow familiar. He recalled his name mentioned when he'd gone to his publisher's office. The thoughts wouldn't die down. So he grabbed his phone and started hunting for details. The name Jonathan Galindo had become a dark meme on the internet. That name was everywhere on social networks. Under the dim light from the bedside lamp, darkness flooding in through the windows, he learned everything he could. Who cared about these horseshit challenges anyway? This person's a nobody. They don't know where I live. He thought as he focused on his breathing that it was all an overreaction like everything else on the internet. After an unsettled sleep that he blamed on yesterday's 4 p.m. coffee, a message was waiting for him when he woke up. It was from the strange account. He swiped the phone open, mug in hand, tapped on the message's icon. It took a moment to register, but it was his home address. It pinged again, saying, "I'm here." His senses were heightened. Was that the sound of the front door opening? He mustered all the courage in his body and paced to the door. He slowly raised his eye to the peephole, only to see a clown's face filled his vision. It was him. He tried to gather his thoughts and stop his flesh from trembling. He pushed the sideboards over the front door and creeped towards the back door. As he turned into the kitchen, there was the clown. And he had a knife in his hand and a huge grin on his face. And Jaden screamed and ran towards the stairs. He paced with a slow confidence. Knowing he'd catch his target, Jaden made it to his bedroom, panicked, heart pounding, lungs throbbing, and he crawled under the bed. He tried to control his breathing, calm down, and get into a tiny ball that the world could never find. He heard footsteps creaking on the floor outside, resonating through the house. The door opened with a creak, a little more. Then more. It groaned with the slow movement. He opened one eye, just a little bit. There was the clown's powdered white face, filled his vision once more. Face to face with this maniac, his body froze as he reached towards him and dragged him out of his hiding place. It's my end, he thought. My last moment. Fight or flight. He reached for the sports trophy from his dresser. As he raised him up, it smashed across the back of his neck. He stumbled into the drapes. Jaden took the chance to run into the bathroom. Door locked. Jonathan Galindo walked on with purpose, headed toward the bathroom. and pounded on the door. Jaden could then hear the cracks through the door. What was he doing? Smashing furniture. What had he done to make him so angry? After minutes that felt like hours, silence descended. "He's gone," he sighed. Jaden waited, sitting on the toilet, wishing he'd brought his phone, wondering if he'd actually left. He made a plan. He had to move. Jaden pulled open the door, revealing his belongings scattered everywhere throughout the hallway. He went downstairs, perched on the edge of the sofa, and assessed the angry destruction all around. He reached for his phone, ready to make a call, but it rang before he could make that call. The vibrations made the phone jump from his hands. He steadied himself and swiped it to answer. "I've found you." The attic ventilation window came to his mind. As his vision began to blur, white powder everywhere.